Trump's foreign policy seems to be in the bust. Namaskar, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. This is, of course, Dev Talks English, where we will give you geopolitical gists of what's happening in the world in English. Trump's foreign policy seems to be in quite a conundrum where he finds himself stuck in all four corners because he's basically taken issues with multiple countries around the world and multiple people around the world at the same time. On top of it, he seems to be struggling with the proverbial powers that be with behind, or the permanent establishment, as they say, with the release of a huge tranche of the Epstein files and the blowback which is coming across about that as well. Americans, especially MAGA, don't seem to be asking too many questions, but the other Americans are asking questions as to what is exactly happening. Now, when we look at his foreign policy, let's look at region specific so that we can actually figure out what exactly is taking place. Let's come to Iran. Firstly, we see that there are negotiations which are on, and currently some headway seems to have gotten. Now, uh, can those negotiations be trusted or not is another question, because the last time when there were negotiations, America decided to go ahead and bomb Iran at the same time. The foreign minister of Iran has given some positive signals, but at the end of it, what we know is that permanent sort of a you know permanent sort of a structure is quite difficult, knowing very well that the Israelis will not want that particular thing to happen. Of course, Washington seems to be re-engaging Tehran, which is not reconciliation, it is kind of risk management. And this is something I had mentioned yesterday. I don't think he has the capacity to actually go ahead and fight, but that really doesn't take away from the fact that Netanyahu could do something without asking Trump and then land the Americans also in a war. USA is basically telling the Iranians not to sell oil in apart from the US dollar, especially to China. And they're forcing that through in the agreement. And at the moment, there's no public discussion of it, but privately, people are willing to accept the fact that there are loads of negotiations happening with Iran where they're being pushed to ensure that there is no sales of oil which is done off the dollar. Now, here we need to also look at that one major fact is that they want to basically freeze Iran's nuclear breakout time. We saw a photograph today where the foreign minister was sitting and discussing with the IAEA chief. Now, I don't know whether Iran is walking back into that IAEA agreement. I'm sorry about that. But it does seem there are some engagements that are actually taking place on the side. When you look at the Americans, Israelis seem to be putting a lot of pressure. So, US is shifting its policy faster than it can actually do something. And on top of it, where I also see that there is a delay strategy which is being applied. Ukraine, if you look at it, there is basically no conversations happening. Russia is pounding Ukraine like nobody's business. They fired, their long-range hypersonic missiles into the western part of Ukraine in Lvov, damaging and quite badly damaging a very important power grid which is located there. This happened about a couple of days ago, where Europeans were basically supplying some energy to Ukraine for its whatever factories and whatever stuff that is left. That was one of the major junction points where the energy used to come in from Europe and actually go to the rest of Ukraine. But now that that has been damaged, no, it's not non-repairable damage, but it is damaged pretty badly. How does that take place is going to become a problem. Ukraine tried its hand at a counter offensive where in certain regions, what pro-Ukrainian accounts are reporting massive gains, but at the end of it, when you look at it and you look at the map, then you actually realize, especially in the south and the southwest of the area, where they are claiming a huge amount of gains, there is no gains because they have basically just gone and reestablished themselves into the line that they withdrew out of some times ago. So yeah, you can call that a counter offensive, or you can count that tactical moving, which is very very important, which will be very important for us to understand. Of course, Zelensky seems pretty hard bent on the fact that there would not be any negotiations, and he's quite, uh, angry, or he's not very comfortable with the fact that the next meeting after Abu Dhabi is going to happen in Geneva, where the Swiss ambassador basically traveled to Russia some time ago to convince him to come and have a meeting in Switzerland rather than outside Europe. So, it's not President Putin who's coming in; it's of course Russian, advisors and Russian negotiators who will be there. But the Washington line seems to be pretty clear. They don't want the Russians to win. They don't want the Ukrainians to collapse. They don't want to have the war in NATO territory, and they don't want to kind of end the war at the terms that the Russians are bringing across, in spite of the fact that they've won the war. So one really sees a Russian build-up, which is taking place in multiple places. In Donbass, there are two. There's a twin city, Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, which needs to be taken up. Uh, Beyond that, I don't see much of a breakaway happening as a matter of fact right now. Guess why? Because you're coming into melting season. All the ice and the snow which is there in that part of the world will melt. It'll create a whole lot of uh, wet mud, which will not be very conducive to actually carrying out operations in the rolling steps that the Russians are in this particular moment. So you will find a huge amount of attacks taking place on the energy infrastructure, and they want the populations to suffer and push out. And of course, Ukrainians also did some drone strikes where about 130 odd drones went in, and in Belgorod and some other regions, they have damaged some power supply grids. Now, to see the situation between the Russians firing at Ukrainian power supply grids and Ukrainians firing at the Russian power supply grids are two different things. Why? Because at the end of it, Ukraine is just temporarily damaging something, whereas what the Russians are doing is very difficult for Ukraine to repair and maintain, especially during a war. What we also see is that there is a complete effort to degrading the Russian military power, and that's something that we hear a lot in their dialogues in the Western media, that Russia is becoming very weak. They're losing 10,000 soldiers, 20,000, 1 lakh, 10 lakh, 15 lakh, 20 lakh. I don't know how many soldiers they've lost. But one thing these commentators don't come out and say, and that's the stupid part of America, is the fact that if Russia was losing so many people, why are there about 30 to 40,000 people volunteering to join up for the fight in Ukraine within Russia? That I think is being missed, and that's deliberately being missed as far as Western propaganda is concerned. The West, that's what one of the problems with the West is. After some time, it starts believing its own propaganda and basically forgets what the reality is. In the Middle East, apart from Iran, the things aren't very very normal. Of course, Israel is putting a lot of pressure on Trump to hit Iran, but at the end of it, we also see Israel is conducting activities in in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza. I believe about 11, 12 people have been killed in some attack that the Israelis conducted. So there is tensions in that region as well, and of course the tensions with the Iranian front as well. Uh, there is major movement actually taking place right now with regards to American forces. They've brought in huge amount of air refuelers. They brought in a huge amount of cargo planes. They brought in. They're allegedly bringing in a second aircraft carrier. And this is something which is important, because we don't know what happened to the first one. I guess a lot of people saying that it went back. This is the replacement one. We would never know. Iran right now has fired some missiles into the Straits of Hormuz, and pretty much in a certain section of the straits, he's actually blocked any particular movement by firing these particular missiles. How long does this no time or this activity goes on? It is only time will tell. But at the end of it, we need to understand that Iran doesn't seem to be backing down, and with the help of the Russians, quite a bit, and the Chinese, they are building up their air defense capability. They are building up their capability as far as uh, uh, defense is concerned. Of course, official records don't say that, but unofficially, we also know the Russians are helping them in accuracy of fire with regards to their high-end systems that the Iranians already have. Now, देखिए, one thing that we need to look at very very clearly when you're talking about this thing, what is the main strategic direction of Trump? He wants to not have big wars, but he wants to use proxies and sanctions. He wants to contain China, which is one thing that he is doing pretty well, and he's been able to reach a lot of places. So he's trying his hard luck to kind of figure out how to get into this particular margin, because at the end of it, when you look at the global power balance, it is only Russia, China, and India to an extent can challenge President Trump. With India, he's kind of put the game on the back burner with opening up of the sanctions and kind of let stuff through within the market. So that's going to be another thing. But at the end of it, we also realize that he is not in a very very a good position as far as his own domestic internal audience is concerned. So that is as for that, guys. Thank you so much. सबसे request है, please request all of you to like this video, subscribe to the channel. This is a new channel that has been opened mostly in English, and I want to direct the analysis towards abroad. So slow and steady, we will do that, and of course, don't ever forget to support this channel if you can. Use the QR code, PayPal, Super Sticker, Super Chats, and of course, you can become members. Namaskar, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.